Yes, now we are recording. Go ahead.
Okay, very good. This is one of my joys that I'd like to share with you in person. It's sort of like the opening line of my chat, which is why I didn't put it in the chat section. But it is always a joy to be with the UUs, especially with the Unitarian Church of Brevard. My association with you goes back over 30 years. Now, I realize not everyone present today remembers me. Some do, Larry and Dean and so forth, but others are relative strangers as of yet. But my association with this particular UU goes back a very long time indeed, and it's a feeling of homecoming whenever I address you, especially when I address you in person. But since that luxury is not available to us in this time of pandemic, uh, the next best thing is addressing you through Zoom from my own living room here in Bangalore, India. Uh, and there is the Danish and the Norwegian speak of hygge, which yes, it is spelled Hygge. That feeling of joy and at the same time of comfort, of deep comfort, like kicking off your shoes and relaxing by the fire. I feel that sense of hygge whenever I share my insights, my concerns, my joys, my question marks with the UUs. So it really is a joy, and I hope we can do this more often. Now, Ian Whitehead is a rather interesting character. He taught in Cambridge, England for many years when he collaborated with Bertrand Russell on a book called Principia Mathematica, which is all but unreadable. And this was one of the groundbreaking works in mathematical logic, 20th century mathematical logic. So Russell and Whitehead enjoyed considerable academic success with that book. But then Whitehead left Cambridge, England to move to Massachusetts, to Harvard, to the one Cambridge to the other, to the across the mill pond. And when he came to Harvard, his interests were no longer centered around mathematical logic or the notations of mathematical logic. Quite the contrary, he started dabbling in philosophy of science first, and then he moved into metaphysics, but a very interesting, curious, and atypical metaphysics of a kind that actually sparks interest among different intellectuals and non intellectuals throughout the world. I mean, he's a very complex philosopher, and yet a lot of his insights are so disarmingly simple and they touch the heartstrings, at various levels to where he has many fans and admirers. And these include people like the cultural anthropologist Bruno Latour, Colin Wilson, the British popularizer and philosopher, who actually argued that Whitehead was one of the people that freed him from existential angst, that he was no longer chronically depressed, worrying about the meaninglessness of life after he had read Whitehead, because Whitehead offers us a universe that's rich in connection, rich in meaning, rich in aliveness. So, and we'll talk about that in a minute. So, Colin Wilson was one of his great supporters and cheerleaders. And then, of course, John Gardner, the American novelist John Gardner, wrote a book called Grendel, where he rewrites the Beowulf legend, the Old English legend of Beowulf, from the monster's point of view, from Grendel's point of view. And Grendel actually quotes Whitehead. And so does the blind poet whose life Grendel spares. A lot of it is straight Whitehead. I mean, it's not paraphrase, he just lifts a whole chunk of prose from Whitehead's Process and Reality and puts it in there in this novel. Um, so there are many, many. Gilles Deleuze, the contemporary French philosopher, is also very much into Whitehead. And so is Isabelle Slanger, a whole host of people. Um, I would say that Whitehead offers us a way out, not only out of existential angst and feeling that life is meaningless, which many of us have felt in our depression during the past year, dealing with COVID 19, dealing with the threat of the disease, the reality of the disease, unfortunately, in many cases, or the reality of the disease for someone whom we love. So it has not been an easy year, and asking those fundamental existential questions comes easily to many of us. But reading Whitehead can be very soothing because Whitehead, uh, is fundamentally an optimist, not a dewy-eyed optimist, not a Pollyanna, not someone who plays the glad game irritatingly, but someone who says life still has meaning, life still has a pattern, life still has significance. It's not just brute matter of fact, and it's not all about pessimism. Whitehead also takes us beyond what he calls the bifurcation of nature. Traditionally in philosophy, especially in metaphysics, the world has been bifurcated. It's mind, body, soul, body, God, the world, the self, the world. All these dichotomies and binaries. And Whitehead slices through all of them by saying the universe is full of connection. It's not all separated. He doesn't believe in a separate self with a capital S or a capital I, the grand ego, the me, the I. Nor does he believe in a world that is separate from the self. I mean, he sees all of this as part of a unity. And going beyond the whole self matter distinction, I think Whitehead makes some very important points. What he says is what we have is a world of actual occasions. These actual occasions are tiny pinpricks of experience. They're tiny pulsations of experience. They're not mental, they're not physical. They may have a mental pole and a physical pole, but they are not confined to mental or physical. And these throbs of, uh, you know, are bent on pursuing their own satisfaction. These occasions seek their own satisfaction, uh, their own appetition, as he puts it. So each occasion, in that sense, is quite selfish because it is seeking for its own fulfillment. Very often it fails. And this is the stuff of tragedy, that it does not reach its goals, it does not reach what it longs for, it stops short or it dies. So tragedy is built into Whitehead's philosophy. But let's go on with the occasions. The occasions, according to Whitehead, prehend each other in this mad dance of process that he doesn't use the word apprehend, he doesn't use the word comprehend. A lamppost for him, or a box, or a piece of garbage, or a flower, is in a sense dimly aware of its own environment. This is why I say there's a case to be made for Whitehead as a pantheist, someone who believes that nature is alive, that nature is not only that God is nature, but that nature is very, very alive, and that nature has feelings, nature has response. Nature may not be able to discuss Emerson or Kant, but things in nature, nor can an inanimate object like a lamppost. But the electrons in the lamppost, according to Whitehead, are dimly prehending me, the observer, even as I, at a very basic level, below the cognitive, below the perceptual, at a subceptual level, if you like, I'm also prehending the lamppost. As I pass by, I might not actually, conscious thought, here's a lamppost, may not strike me. And yet, the electrons in my body are pulsating with the electrons in that lamppost. And so that is how there is a relationship with a seemingly inanimate object. I mean, life is, the world is full of these very mysterious pulsations of experience, these actual occasions that are constantly prehending the other. They're also prehending their own past. Each occasion dies. The child that you were, the actual occasions, the society of occasions that made up the child that you were, that's gone. It's dead. But it's replaced by other occasions, the you that's sitting here in front of a Zoom camera, listening to me. So So in a sense, there is an immortality, what Whitehead calls objective immortality, where the actual occasions of the past are immortalized in today. My skin, my stomach, my face bear the imprint of that child and the adolescent that I once was, and the young person that I was, and the middle aged person that I once was. So all of those are encapsulated, they are immortalized in the current me. And when I die, that when all the societies of actual occasions that make up Raj Ayyer are no longer here, there's still objective immortality in terms of albums, perhaps albums shared on Facebook, perhaps people talking about me, perhaps books that I've written, or perhaps videos of you talks like this. So, in a sense, nothing ever dies. But so there is objective immortality. Whitehead is very iffy about subjective immortality. He doesn't believe that we will survive either in another body necessarily, or that we're going to go to heaven or hell, or that we're going to be in some afterlife state, let's say on the astral plane, or however we imagine or fantasize the afterlife. He doesn't talk about that at all. He talks about objective immortality, which is immortality here and now, immortality in this world. He doesn't talk about the afterworld, and his few comments about those who believe in an afterlife are somewhat skeptical. But there are Whiteheadians who say that we can extend his theory of objective immortality to include subjective immortality as well, because of all the societies of actual occasions that make up this entity called me or you or XYZ, that after death, we simply transplant, we simply proceed with this adventure of new creation. For that's what it's all about. We are constantly, these actual occasions are creating and then being destroyed, creating and then being destroyed, and objectively immortal in their successors. So the world is really like a beautiful poem or a beautiful work of art where things are constantly perishing to be replaced by their successors. And yet there's a tragedy, there's a sense of loss about having jettisoned the past, about having left the past behind. Those past occasions are no longer with us. And in this, there is sorrow. And this is why Whitehead is a philosopher of process. He's a process philosopher, which means that he doesn't believe in hard, constipated realities like mind, matter, uh, God, self. He really believes in a very loose, fluid process of actual occasions that come into being, that are sustained for a while, and then die to give rise to their successors. A process which, as I said, he calls objective immortality. So, this is a very interesting concept. And of course, it's something that you find in the Romantic poets, lines that Whitehead is very fond of quoting. And Shelley's simile is wonderful, like bubbles on a river, sparkling, bursting, borne away. So, all of us, and in a sense, all the actual occasions in our bodies, all the actual occasions in our pancreas, our liver, our kidneys, our immune system, they perish to give rise to their successors. And in this, there is a sense of tragedy, but there's also a sense of completion, because each actual occasion, remember, has been striving for its own satisfaction. It may not reach that satisfaction, but it's reached something. It has created, it's created you as you are now, the table as it is now, the lamppost, the rose bush as it is now. So those past occasions have their use. So in a sense, their very objective immortality gives them value, gives them preciousness. And the fact that they are transient, the fact that they are just blips, they're just blips, they come into being and then they perish to give rise to their successors. Even this is cause for affirmation. Even this is cause for affirmation. There's nothing to be depressed about. There is tragedy, but there is also a sense of peace because one knows that nothing ever perishes completely. There is always a succession, there is always a follow up, there's always an encore. Uh, so, so that's one aspect of Whitehead. And of course, Whitehead's God is also a very peculiar God. I mean, on the one hand, God is seeking his own enjoyment, like all actual occasions are. God is like the actual occasion or the ultimate society of occasions that no, he doesn't orchestrate it. He has too much respect for the freedom of the world. Uh, so everyone is free to make their own mistakes. Every actual occasion is free to blunder in its own way. God isn't going to stop it from blundering or making a mistake or doing something remarkably stupid. Um, God himself is always seeking satisfaction, yet always failing. God is a deeply flawed God in A.N. Whitehead's metaphysics. And because of this, there's no problem of evil. In traditional Christianity, there was the problem of evil. If God is all powerful, if God is all caring and all loving, both are necessary, all powerful and all loving, why evil? If God is evil, or if God is limited, if there are many gods, polytheism, if there is some, then there is no problem of evil. But in Whitehead's case, there is no problem of evil because God is limited. God is not perfect. God is not perfect. And even his love is not perfect. Uh, but God is, and this is a very interesting and moving concept that he develops in his masterwork, Process and Reality. God is the great companion and fellow sufferer who understands. God is the great companion and fellow sufferer who understands. So this is a God who is by our side and is by the side of the rose as she dies, is by the side of every COVID patient that is suffering. God is intensely aware of tragedy, and at the same time, he doesn't intervene to stop it. And in a sense, he can't because that is interfering with the freedom of the actual occasion. They have to live out their own destinies, and those destinies are far from being complete or perfect. Quite the contrary, they're very limited destinies and limiting ones. So he neatly ducks the problem of evil. There is no problem of evil. It's a very interesting God. Now, there is a kind of a shadow of Platonism, of old Plato in Whitehead, because he talks about eternal objects. These are like Plato's forms, they're like pure essences. But they are more a repository of possibilities. They're not really ideal forms that we should strive for or that the philosopher should really seek, as Plato would have it. They are quite compatible with being embodied in a very down to earth universe. Because they are simply, as Whitehead would say, a lure. They lure us with possibility. So even in the midst of a deep depression, for example, there are always these unrealized potentials that are beckoning to us. No one's ever really finished. And even after you die, even after an actual occasion perishes, that actual occasion lives on. So really, there's nothing to worry about. It's only those who want to survive as a self, who want to survive personally, who want subjective immortality, that are going to be disappointed with the latter philosophy of Whitehead, because there is no death in that sense in Whitehead's philosophy, but it's an impersonal immortality. It's not a personal immortality where I can say, I, Raj, or I, Beth. No, there is no consolation of that kind. Now, there are Whiteheadian theologians like Cobb, for example, who have tried to fit in subjective immortality with Whitehead's philosophizing. As I hinted a few minutes ago, it is possible to work out a theory of subjective immortality as some kind of ongoing adventure of actual occasions after the events that we call physical death. But I won't go dwell on that any further. But so there is that possibility that that could be there. But even so, I'm not sure that it adds up to a full-fledged subjective immortality in terms of I, Raj, recognize myself and I see God and I see the saints and angels, or I'm reincarnated and then I go to a psychic who tells me that I was Raj Ayyer in a previous life. None of that. All those are false consolations from Whitehead's point of view. He doesn't even address those. One important advance, I think, that Whitehead made was that for him, the all of this, the the seeking satisfaction, failing, dying, objectively immortalizing, all of this is really an aesthetic experience. He does not believe in morality at all. In fact, he poo-poos, he makes fun of any morality that's handed from a mountaintop or by a prophet in a cave or by, at the very least, by some ancestor, who is incredibly wise and knows the answers to our problems. There is no morality, there is no right or wrong. In that sense, Whitehead is surprisingly close to Nietzsche because he believes that we need to go beyond good and evil. And like Nietzsche, he actually says that it's the sense of beauty, it's a sense of aesthetics that triumphs in the end. That morality needs to be replaced with aesthetics. And of course, these are suggestions that are very radical from the standpoint of traditional philosophy, but they excite the people that are on the cusp, people who are exploring new frontiers, like Bruno Latour. He's not an ordinary sociologist or anthropologist. And so people like that are very excited and attracted by this kind of concept, and a concept that includes the non-human as well as the human. Whitehead societies of actual occasions embrace the lamppost as well as the monkey, as well as the philosopher. Uh, Everything is encompassed in his cosmology. But for him, all this is primarily an aesthetic experience. And philosophy has denigrated aesthetics traditionally. It doesn't have much use for it. That's one reason why Nietzsche and Whitehead, at very different levels, mind you, they're very different philosophers. They come from very different methodologies and presuppositions. They are, you know, uh, so traditional philosophy has disparaged both Nietzsche and Whitehead. Even in spite of their differences, there is at least this commonality of wanting to go beyond morality to aesthetics. And philosophy has no use for that. Likewise, the animism that I pointed out, when you see a lamppost as alive, as throbbing with juice, with aliveness, with dim prehension of the person looking at it or of its environment. If the actual occasions in the lamppost prehend their own past in a very dim sort of way. I mean, they're not cognitive prehensions at all. Uh, they're not higher societies of occasions, as Whitehead would say, that are gifted with consciousness and can make aesthetic judgments or can read Kant or Emerson. But they are subceptual, below the surface of perception, below the surface of cognition, responses to the environment and responses to one's own past. And that's okay for him. Um, but this is really animistic. And animism is a bad word in philosophy. Just a couple of years ago, I was in Prague, the Czech Republic, presenting a paper at a Whitehead conference. It was the East European Summer School of Process Thought. And here were all these very distinguished Whiteheadians from all over Europe, and a couple of them from the US. And I actually used the word animism. And there was pin drop silence in that room. You know, I had just uttered an unimaginable word from the standpoint of those philosophers. Later, after I'd finished presenting, someone said, "May I give you a suggestion? Can you replace the word animism with the word panpsychism? That's so much more respectable philosophically." So, Whitehead is really a philosopher who is on the margins. He is not part of mainstream academic philosophizing. And there's much in his metaphysics to make people acutely uncomfortable. Nor can he just be written off uh, like a traditional metaphysician, for example, Hegel or F.H. Bradley. You know, they're much more easy to grapple with. And even if one sneers at metaphysics, it's much easier to do it with them. And this man has all kinds of curves. This man has all kinds of hidden corners. And this man has a very new phraseology and a very new way of approaching the universe. I think the Native Americans would have had very little once the concepts were sort of translated into their own language and modes of perception, would have no problems with Whitehead at all. He is really talking about a universe that was very familiar to many Native American tribal cultures, not so familiar to the sneering cognitive Western consciousness, because this is a consciousness that does not allow for a deep interconnection at the heart of things and a deep aliveness and even a consciousness, a primitive consciousness in all things, yes, including the toaster and the lamppost. Uh, so, any questions thus far? Okay, let me just go on for a few minutes, and then I'm going to throw it open for Q&A. Beth, is that all right?
Yeah, it's fine.
I
You have
guess.
a couple questions when you're ready.
Okay, all right. Now, Whitehead has a beautiful saying in Adventures of Ideas. It's one of his purple passages that I actually like very much. He says, "At the heart of the nature of things, there is always the dream of youth and the harvest of tragedy. The universe begins with the dream of youth and ends by reaping tragic beauty." Now, what does he mean by that? What he means is that the dream of youth is archetypal. It's not meant to talk, it is not a reference to physical young men and women. Anyone can have the dream of youth at whatever age. The dream of youth is always the dream of new possibility and an idealistic dream that just projects into the future, visualizing and imagining the best. The harvest of tragedy is the falling short of that idea when that doesn't manifest, when that doesn't fulfill. Uh, then there's always that process of limitation built into everything, including Whitehead's God. But in all this, there's beauty. At the heart of the nature of things, there's always the dream of youth and the harvest of tragedy. The universe begins with the dream of youth and ends by reaping tragic beauty. In other words, it's tragic, but it's also beautiful because the beauty lies in the fact that there were these dreams that are now not a complete shambles, because out of that dream has come other dreams. Out of that dream has come limited manifestation and certain realities. Out of that dream has come successors. That's the whole process of objective immortality. But the dream as a dream, the dream as a total construct has not happened. And in that is tragedy. And then there's, of course, death, which for Whitehead, in one passage, he says, that's the ultimate evil, the ultimate tragedy is death. So, but even in death, as I said, there's objective immortality. So, in a sense, you could say that in Whitehead, nothing is really lost. And there is a God there who, however limited, is still the companion and fellow sufferer who preserves our moments. So all of our moments are remembered by God or held in the memory of God. So, and this again is a very difficult concept for many people, especially if you don't believe in a God. I myself have, but let's remember that this is not Blake's Nobo Daddy, nobody's daddy. It's not the old patriarchal God. It's not the all powerful, omniscient, omnipotent, all good, all loving God. It is a God who is flawed, a God who is learning, a God who's a bit of a bozo, but a God who still cares deeply and is a great companion and fellow sufferer with us. So we are held in the memory of this being, of this entity, of the super process, if you like, for Whitehead. So, so that in a nutshell is some of the highlights of what he talks about. There's much more to Whitehead, much more to discover. I mean, it cannot be reduced to a few words, but let's remember the basic concepts once again. No bifurcation of nature, no mind body, no soul body a la Descartes. The whole Cartesian bifurcation of nature needs to be given up. And other bifurcations such as God and the world, the self and the world, all that needs to be given up. And then there is a process or a series of processes, societies of actual occasions in my stomach, in my brain, in the lamppost, in the toaster, all in their own dance, and each objectively immortal in its successors and prehending all the time. And a process that leads to tragedy, but it also leads to the ripeness of beauty. So, so those are some key concepts. Now, I have one problem with all of this. The Whitehead, because of his opposition to Descartes and Descartes' imperial thinking self, I think, therefore I am, the cogito. Because of that, he tends to brush aside any concept of the self. And I think there is a viable concept of the self, the aesthetic self, for example, that he talks about, the higher prehensive states of consciousness without which art would be impossible. I don't see how you could talk about the higher prehensive consciousness without some kind of small s self. It does not have to be Descartes' imperial thinking self, but it needs to be some kind of small s self that is intimately connected with the deep ecology of everything that surrounds it. But you cannot bypass or avoid a self completely. That is one of the problems I have with Whitehead, is that you have to pretty much wring the concept of a self out of him. You have to just squeeze his philosophy and wring it dry before you can actually begin to sense, yes, there might be the glimmerings of a small s self when he talks about aesthetics. But I really think that, you know, he needs to spell that out, because without that aesthetic self, everything, including the philosophy of Whitehead, makes no sense. And again, I'm not proposing a return to a good old-fashioned dualism or to a good old-fashioned self with a capital S. Not at all. Far from it. Far be it from me to say that. But I am arguing for a limited S aesthetic self. It has been a pleasure exchanging these insights. I look forward to your questions, and I'd like to wish each and every one of you a very happy pandemic-free 2021. I hope the vaccine or several vaccines prove successful without undue side effects, and I hope that we flourish like the proverbial Florida palm tree once again.
All right.
Any questions?
We're going to take some questions. Just a reminder, we are still recording. Larry, I see your hand first. Go ahead.
Okay. Well, Raj, I'm sure you're aware that there has been an ongoing discipline of consciousness. There are actually meetings held around the world as to what is consciousness, with ideas that are all the way from kind of like a biological accident, an illusion, something that can be attained by a computer or not. And
All that.
there are many flavors as to what is consciousness.
Right.
And there are tech sci-fi ideas about what is consciousness too, as well as Buddhists, Judeo-Christian, and Hindus. So where do you think Whitehead stands in that continuum?
Well, I think Whitehead would be very much into consciousness studies. As a matter of fact, I was, my little piece on Whitehead was published by the National Institute of Advanced Studies in India as part of their consciousness studies program. So Whitehead, I think, is very relevant to this enterprise, but he would have a kind of a Native American or tribalist perspective on consciousness. He doesn't see consciousness as something separate from nature. He sees consciousness as implied in all of nature. It's not just human consciousness, cognitive consciousness, robotic consciousness. It's also animal consciousness, lamppost consciousness, toaster consciousness. Everything, in a sense, has responsiveness, comprehension.
But the consciousness we experience.
But it's not the consciousness we experience, but it has its own. A plant does not have the level of consciousness that we experience, and plants are responsive to pain. Plants could be responsive to Mozart playing in the background. Plants may not be into acid house music. So the fact that there are all these distinctions surely implies that the plant has some kind of consciousness. Let's start with plants and animals first, because it's easier to see that they have at least a rudimentary consciousness, as opposed to the lamppost, which appears to be stretching it just a bit. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah, I love that chuckle, Lee. Okay, yeah, go on.
I see Cindy has posted a question, and it sounds like Kurt Vonnegut. So I don't know if she's read Kurt of timelessness. Anyway, I'll
Okay.
Thank you, Raj.
Thank you. Cindy, could you repeat that question for the benefit of suffering humankind? Cindy, are you there? Are you with us?
Yes.
She did it in the chat.
Yeah, okay.
It's more of a comment than a question. I've often noted to myself and others that in the God's eye view, there really is no past, present, or future. There's only one now, right?
Right.
Right.
Yeah.
Everything is held in God's eye. Everything is held in a moment, because God knows everything that has happened and also everything that will happen, not just what is happening, right?
That's not Cindy.
Right. So when you think about that, when you think about that in Whitehead's perspective, okay,
right?
So surely, you say that he has no concept of self, really, but in fact, that's not true, is it? Because every event, every moment must have its own self-awareness, right? And isn't that a concept of self?
Yes. If you buy that as a concept of self, where an actual occasion in the life history of the lamppost can have a primitive awareness, yes. In that sense, he does have a theory of the self. But I think we need something more substantive, something a little more connected to the self as we know it in traditional philosophy, to make sense of aesthetics and to make sense of this. Yeah.
Maybe traditional philosophy has it all wrong, and once you no, I'm serious.
Yeah. No, it might very well. Yeah.
I just commented to somebody else offline. Somebody was asking about had I read Watchmen, which I have not. I have read Vonnegut, of course.
Right.
But they were commenting that character there had a perception of time as all one moment, that that he could see all of time in one moment. But so of course did Siddhartha, the Buddha, right?
Right.
Yeah. So
and so does the August. Yeah.
Exactly. So this is not actually a new concept, if you will, in human philosophy. It's just one
Not
that
at all.
has not been mainstream in Western philosophy. So,
Yes, that's
so
true.
we need to make that distinction. We in the West, we often forget about that. We think that, Siddhartha is something we read in high school, and then, it's never of any other importance in our lives. But in fact, in the East, that is the importance, right? I mean,
Right,
think about
right.
the number of
Yeah.
Buddhists versus the number of Christians, let's say. It's far greater. We
Yeah.
don't imagine that in the West, and we probably should.
Yeah. Yeah. Cindy, I also, when you said that this is not Western, I beg to differ, because this whole concept of there is no past, present, or future from a God's eye perspective, it's all the same, was actually said by Augustine. I mean,
Sure.
that was Augustine, I mean, this was his solution to the problem of time. Because people were teasing him with riddles like, what was God doing before time, before being a temporal adjective, a time related relationship? And he says that all those questions are absurd because there's no before or after in God's view of time. It's all lined up simultaneously in this here, this now.
Yes.
Yeah. So the Augustinian view is extremely similar to what you're talking about.
Oh yes, but
And he actually,
where did he get it from?
well, not the Buddhist. Not I'm not convinced that he got it from the Buddhists, but
Maybe
yeah.
not.
That is beautiful. Are you sitting in a snowy landscape, or is that just a painting behind you?
So that's actually if the door, the sliding glass door that is actually behind me were not there, that's what you'd be seeing if you looked out behind me.
I
Wow.
see.
It's
Wow.
it's
Where
a
are?
photo. I took the photo this morning because I looked out my bedroom window and saw the light like that, and so I ran down and took the photo so I could put it up.
Where are you, if I may ask?
I'm in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania.
Ah, okay.
Pennsylvania.
But on the outskirts of Pittsburgh, I bet. I mean, that doesn't look like downtown Pittsburgh.
Oh, it's not downtown Pittsburgh, but it's not far. It's only about 5 miles from downtown.
Okay. Yeah. But those are very pretty. Yeah.
Yeah.
All right, Anne has been waiting patiently for a question. Anne, go ahead and unmute whenever you're ready.
Good morning. Can you hear me?
Yes. Loud and
Great.
clear.
This is so interesting. And I'm especially intrigued by you're mentioning that Whitehead doesn't see a morality, but rather aesthetics. And I'm intrigued by how do you develop a system of morality, especially for young people, based on aesthetics. I've been just toying with that in my mind. I can see it for myself as an old person,
Yeah.
who's made mistakes and developed a value system. But for a young person, how would
Yeah.
that work, do you think?
Well, that's a good question. I mean, I'm not sure that he's talking about child rearing or how you would do this with a young person, how you would begin to cultivate a kind of a sense of right and wrong. But I think in an adult person, he is saying we need to get beyond right and wrong. We need to get beyond good and evil. Here are a couple of quotes from Adventures of Ideas, one of his most famous and really one of his most lovable books. The defense of morals, he says, is one battle cry which rallies stupidity against change. And of course, when he talks about morality here, one thinks about the morality of the fundamentalist in whatever faith.
Mhm.
One thinks of a fundamentalist terror. One thinks of the morality of us versus them. Our exiting president was very fond of us versus them, wasn't he? And that is a moral stance. We are superior and they are not. They're dirty. Let's build a wall to exclude them. So morality in the traditional sense, morality, mere morality, might be subject to some of these criticisms that Whitehead levels at it. What you're talking about in terms of raising children is a different issue. Don't go into the park alone because you could get molested.
Well, that's
Might
not
be sound
morality.
advice.
That's
not
not
morality.
morality.
That's survival.
Right.
Yeah. Yeah.
There's a mystery writer. I'll think of his name after we're done talking. But he has he writes about the Navajos.
Yeah.
He has two characters who are policemen, and for them, in the tribe, doing something malicious, you're not walking in beauty.
Right.
So they don't punish. They
Right.
guide the person to walk in beauty again. I'm
Yeah.
thinking maybe that's kind of what he was thinking of.
Yeah. Perhaps.
Mhm.
Perhaps. Yeah. Is that Tony Hillerman that you're talking about?
Yes. Thank you. And his daughter also is writing now.
They're really smart.
Mystery novels?
Come
Yes.
Is she right?
Yes.
Okay.
Not
I've
as
got to
well
check
as
it.
her
What's
not as well as her father, but she's writing the same, using the same characters. Yes.
I see. What is their name?
Anne
Hillerman.
Yes.
Okay. I'll look her up on Amazon.
Okay.
Here's another quote from morality from Whitehead on morality. She says, "Moral codes have suffered from the exaggerated claims made for them. Each such code has been put out by a god on a mountaintop, or a saint in a cave, or at the very least by an ancestor whose wisdom is unquestionable." Unquote. So if by morality you mean traditional concepts of good, bad, don't do this, don't do that, don't play with this person, don't play with that, don't have sex with so and so, don't, it's okay to have sex with such and so, then a lot of what he's saying does apply. And so when he talks about aesthetics, he would say that the crucifixion of Jesus, the reason it's wrong, quote unquote, is not because of morality. It's because the aesthetic spectacle of innocents being crucified is horrific. It's the horrifying nature, the aesthetically terrible nature of this crucifixion that makes it so barbaric and that makes it so reprehensible. Not morality, not saying it is bad to kill someone innocent, as much as a sense of the aesthetic horror of the crucifixion. Does that make sense?
Yes.
Yes.
I think it's a question. I think it's something you could discuss for a lifetime, actually, but it does make sense. Yes, thank you.
All right, Eugenie,
Thank you,
something
Anne.
quick, and then we're going to have to wrap up. So Eugenie, go ahead and unmute.
Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
So, hi, Raj.
Very well. Hi, how are you, Eugenie? You
I'm
look very
fine,
you
thank
look very
you.
comfortable in that bedroom. It's yeah.
Thank you.
Talk about Hugo in the Scandinavian sense. I mean,
It's chilly.
you're
It's
all-
chilly in Florida today.
Well, it's chilly in Scandinavia too.
That's true. So I just thought I wanted to address the idea of lamppost consciousness for a minute, to say that I think maybe for many people this is a very surprising and startling idea, but it's not the first time that it's come into my mind. I was introduced to it by a Japanese exchange student who spent a couple of months living with us, and we took long walks, and sometimes we talked about something spiritual. And I believe that she would have been of the Shinto faith, and I remember her telling me about how little stones, right, had spirits, and that they would pray to them, and I don't think she thought that every inanimate object had a spirit, but there were some qualities of certain ones that were loved by you, or that were just somehow important And we even see that in a popular culture figure now, this Marie Kondo, who's the life-changing magic of tidying up author, right? And one of her, I mean, she will come into a house and bless the spirits of the house, and uh, when parting with an object, she will thank the object. So I
Yeah.
don't know how close or how far that is with some of Whitehead's ideas, but anyway,
Yes.
for what it's worth.
And I'm so glad you mentioned stones, because consider, for example, our New Age attachment to crystals. Crystals are also stones. I mean, but they're not just stones. They are in fact endowed with all kinds of attributes, and there are different crystals that can do different things for you. So the idea that crystals have a consciousness, and that you can tap into this consciousness or infuse your own intentions into it. Say you want to manifest abundance and you use this particular crystal. Let's say it could be a green crystal, or something of the sort. It could be an emerald. I infuse it with all my intentions to attract a lot of money, or to find myself a job, even in the middle of a pandemic, which seems to be impossible. But you work on your beliefs and you gently let those beliefs go. And then you imbue this crystal with with your feelings of abundance, and with a clearly stated goal of, this is how much money I want. If you do that sort of thing, I don't see what's wrong with crediting the lamppost with consciousness. I mean, if a crystal and you see, the lamppost is something that's an example that's used by Whitehead, which is why I used it. He doesn't talk about crystals or stones. He does talk about lampposts. And he does talk about Cleopatra's needle in London, seeing that as having some kind of dim, prehensive consciousness. Yeah.
May I
Thank you.
interject something into that?
Yeah, absolutely.
Well, what I read about crystals and their formations is that they have a radioactive or an emission type of radio transmission.
Yeah.
I think Joe Thorne Jr. Had a crystal radio that he demonstrated, that he used. That's how radio started. So they radiate out whatever your intention is to other locations or something. It depends on the thought process that you give it. But that's what I had read about crystals. I don't know that much about the other gems, but I think that they're a little different from the lamppost, except the lamppost has metals and light bulbs which radiate out as well. And there's a whole metal kingdom that also has communicated with me.
Right.
I almost feel like I was an engineer in my last life, but he would say, oh, well, that's just kind of like your, arbitrary thought system going awry or something. But I have had experiences.
No, he doesn't. Whitehead doesn't say anything negative about reincarnation. He doesn't say anything positive.
Oh, no, I wasn't talking about reincarnation. I was talking about arbitrary viewpoints about otherness and what, because I've just had this kind of relationship with metal, the metal kingdom, at the fixing car doors, I think a lot of people fix things.
Even otherwise, this lamppost might be an intimate part of what I call home. This particular lamppost that I've known since I was 6 months old could be endowed with a lot of affection, a memory of childhood tantrums, memory of my mother, memory of this, memory of that. And so this lamppost could be more than just a lamppost as far as I'm concerned. Of course, that still begs the question of whether it's the lamppost itself is conscious of these things, or whether I am ascribing all these feelings to the lamppost. Certainly, I think it's, I'm ascribing all these feelings and projecting all these feelings onto the lamppost. But the lamppost, insofar as it's composed of electrons,
Right.
has a certain level of aliveness. I mean, electrons behave in surprisingly alive ways. You know, they're probability waves that can become particle-ish when somebody is observing them. You know, it's a much more mysterious universe than we realize. And so I don't see anything inherently improbable about a lamppost having, as I said, consciousness does not mean cognitive consciousness. It would be very surprising indeed if the lamppost in Alice in Wonderland mode started talking to me about Emerson or Kant. I don't think that's likely to happen. And
Yeah, another thing.
if it does, it might be a good idea visiting the nearest psychiatrist. But the point is, the lamppost still has a level of what he would call dim, visceral prehension.
Okay, now I understand what that means better. Thank you.
Yeah. Okay.
All right, we're going to have to leave it there for now. Thank you so much for speaking with us today, Raj. We appreciate it.
Thank you.
I'm going to go ahead and stop the recording.
I think